President.
Senator from Iowa.
Mr. President, I just want to thank our Majority Whip for, again, telling it like it is. What's happening with health care in America today? We've come too far to turn back. We've made tremendous changes in the way people are going to access the health care system in America because of the Affordable Care Act. Look, we all admit, were mistakes made? Were there glitches in this and in that? Yes. But we went from a system in which people were excluded from getting health care. You talked about them. The various people with pre-existing conditions, kids, people that just had no access whatsoever. Now they're covered. That is a huge leap in this country. So if we made some mistakes, if there were a few glitches and stuff, we worked those out. But our friends on the other side say, no, ditch the whole thing. Get rid of everything. Turn the clock back. I agree with the senator from Illinois. The people of America don't want to turn that clock back. They want to move ahead. They're now getting covered more than ever before with affordable coverage that they've never had before, and we're not going to turn the clock back. I thank the senator. Mr. President, first I ask unanimous consent that Diana Hodges and Benjamin Rowland, interns with the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, be granted floor privileges for the duration of today's session.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I want to take the time this morning to talk about an issue that has been brewing for a long time, is now going to be coming to a head here in the Senate sometime in the next several days, I hope, and it's one which compels us to do something, and that is to raise the minimum wage in the United States of America. Now, Mr. President, we have waited too long to do this, and so we have to act on it as soon as possible. So I'd just like to point out some of the data and some of the statistics confronting us right now. First of all, why should anyone be afraid of voting to raise the minimum wage? The American people are way ahead of us on this. You look at the polling data. To increase raising the minimum wage to $10.10 an hour. All voters, 73%. Democrats, 90%. Independents, 71%. And even Republicans, 53%, say that we ought to be raising the minimum wage. So the vast majority of American people want to do this. Now here's just, again, a chart from across the country. Here's Arkansas, here's Florida, Georgia, my state of Iowa, Kentucky, Mississippi, Wisconsin, all 52, 73%, 61, 54%. The vast majority of Americans in these states say, yes, we need to raise the minimum wage. So it's not just one part of the country. Small business owners support raising the minimum wage. Poll done of small business owners, 57% say we should raise the minimum wage as opposed to 43%. So, small businesses, they get it. Voters say that raising the minimum wage will help the economy. This comports with what over 600 economists, including several Nobel Prize economists, have said. Raising the minimum wage will boost aggregate demand, will raise the GDP in America. The economy benefits. Well, you know what? The American people, they get it. They may not understand all the intricacies of economics and economic analysis, but they get it. 56% believe that it will help the economy. 22% said they don't know. Only 21% say it will hurt. So the vast majority of Americans understand in their bones that raising the minimum wage is going to help the economy. Why? Because they know it'll put more spending power in their pockets. And when people in lower wage jobs get more money, what do? They don't go to Europe. They don't buy private islands and private jets. They spend it in the local economy on Main Street where the small businesses are. So again, that's the American people get it. Now, why should we be concerned about this right now? Well, the minimum wage is not kept up with average wages. In 1968, the minimum wage was 53% of the average wages in America. Today, it's 36% of the average wages in America. A tremendous decline in between those who get the minimum wage and what the average wages are in America. Since 2009, the last time that we had an increase in the minimum wage, let's look what's happened to the things that low-income people have to spend their money on. As I said, they're not renting private jets and they're not going to fancy restaurants to eat. But they do have to spend money on electricity, rent, auto repair, food at home, child care, and mass transit. So the minimum wage has gone up 0% since 2009, zero. Electricity, 4.2% increase. Rent, 7.3%. Auto repair, 7.6%. Food at home, 8.8%. Child care, 11.7%. Mass transit, 17% increase. So if you're a minimum wage worker, all your costs have gone up. Your income has stayed the same. Your income has basically stayed the same. And here's another thing the American people get. They understand this. CEOs get big raises. Since 2009, the last time we had the increase in the minimum wage, CEO raises have gone up 23%, 14%, 5%. Oh, that's about, 40-some percent. Minimum wage stayed the same. So those at the top keep getting more and more and more. Low-income workers, they get nothing. They just keep falling further and further behind. So how are we doing compared to other countries? We always say, well, we're doing all right. America's doing okay. Well, let's look, what are we doing compared to other countries? Here's the national minimum wage rates in U.S. dollars, in nominal U.S. dollars. Right now, the United States is third from the bottom. There's Portugal, Spain, United States. Look who's ahead of us. Austria, Japan, Canada, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Ireland, Belgium, France, Luxembourg, Australia. Australia is at $16.34 an hour. Minimum wage in U.S. dollars. Here's France, 11.98. Ireland, $11.16. New Zealand at $10.96 an hour. We're way behind other countries in what the minimum wage is. And here's who benefits. 28 million workers will get a raise if we raise the minimum wage. 28 million workers. 15 million women, 13 million men, 4 million African American workers. I'll have more to say about that. 7 million Hispanic workers and 7 million parents will get a raise. Now, again, that's not just minimum wage workers. A lot of people who make less than $10.10 an hour will get a raise. So it's not just those at $7.25. It's a lot of other people will also get a raise. And that's another thing I've heard from my Republican friends. They say, well, there are a lot of people that are making up to $40,000 a year, families that'll make more money. That's true. So this isn't just, raising the minimum wage isn't just for people in poverty. That's true, it helps them, gets them out of poverty. But it also helps families who maybe there are two workers in the family and they're both low-income workers. They're making above the minimum wage, but they're low income. Or let's say you have a family with maybe 3 kids. One breadwinner makes a decent income of $30,000. The other one makes minimum wage. That family, too, will get an increase. So here's what happens. About 83% of families in America will get a raise. That is, everyone making less than $60,000 a year. 83% of American families making less than $60,000 a year will get a raise. That's middle income. That's middle America. And there are a few, 17%, the economists tell us, that make over $60,000. That's families now, will also get a boost. But the majority are families that making less than $60,000 a year. So it's a middle class bill. Raising the minimum wage helps middle class families. It also does one other important thing. It helps kids. You don't think about this a lot. 14 million kids will benefit from raising the minimum wage. 14 million that are now in low-income families, and they're struggling to get by. And so I thought it was interesting that the American Pediatric Association, people you take your babies to see the doctor and stuff, the American Pediatric Association says, yes, raising the minimum wage will help our kids. They'll help them develop better. They'll have better oral health, better immunization rates, It'll decrease rates of obesity and its complications. So the APA Task Force, the American Pediatric Association Task Force on Child Poverty, supports raising the minimum wage. They get it. They see these kids in poverty and low income. They know what's happening to them. By raising that minimum wage, you'll help kids have a better life and a better start in life. So let me just talk a little bit now about the basics of this bill. First of all, our bill would raise the minimum wage from $7.25 an hour, where it's been since 2009, to $10.10 an hour in 3 steps: 95 cents, 95 cents, 95 cents over 3 years. We then index it to rates of inflation in the future, so no longer will people who make the minimum wage fall below the poverty line. Keep it above the poverty line. The third thing our bill does is raise the minimum wage for tipped workers. Can you believe this? When I tell people this, they say, no, you must be wrong, Harkin. Tipped workers in America today, minimum wage, $2.13 an hour. People say, that can't be right. It is. It's been at $2.13 an hour since 1991. Imagine that, $2.13 an hour. Well, what our bill would raise that from $2.13 an hour over about a 6-year period of time, would raise that to 70% of the minimum wage, which is pretty close to what the historical average was, but before 1991, that tipped wages would be up there. So it raises it to 70% of the minimum wage over 6 years, and then indexes that also in the future. So again, why did we settle on $10.10 an hour? Here, I want to get this down here. Why did we settle on $10.10 an hour? Some people say, why $10.10? Why not $9? I've heard that bandied about a lot. Well, here's why we raised it. Because we know where the poverty line is. Back in the past, in 1968, the minimum wage was 120% of poverty. So we said, if we raise the minimum wage and we want to get it just above the poverty line and index it for the future so we wouldn't be falling below it before, what would that be? Well, to get it to 107% of the poverty line, just above the poverty line, it would be $10.10 an hour. So again, in 1968, the minimum wage was 120% of poverty line. Now it is 81% of the poverty line. Our bill would raise it up to 107% of the poverty line. That's why we picked 10-10, because it gets you above the poverty line, and then you index it in the future. Now, the historic average on this has been, people say, well, isn't that a big increase? Well, historically, whenever we've raised the minimum wage, the percent increase has been about 41%. Our bill raises it 39%. So we wanted to kind of keep it also within the boundaries of what we'd done in the past. Past about 41%, going clear back to 1939, average about 41%. You might notice that in the 90s there was a 27% and a 21%. That's because, for some odd reason, we raised it twice in the 1990s. So we looked at the decades. Historically, we've raised the minimum wage about once every decade. If you look at it in the decades, we're again right about average. 150%, 33, 60, 81. In the 80s, it was only 16. Then in the 90s, we had 2 steps, 54%. In 2007, when we passed it, we raised it 41%. By the way, that was signed into law by a Republican president, not a Democratic president. And so ours raises it by 39%. So we wanted to get it above the poverty line, index it there, but keep it within the boundaries sort of what we've done in the past. And that's what this bill does. So it's critical to get it above the poverty line. The minimum wage has lost 32% of its purchasing power. So in 1968, if we had kept the minimum wage at the same relative status from 68 to now, the minimum wage would be $10.71 an hour. It's now $7.25. So in those years, 32% of its purchasing power has been lost by minimum wage workers. So again, I wanted to cover a little bit on the tipped wages, because that's another important part of our bill. People say, well, tipped wages, people make tips and all that, and we keep hearing from some entities that if we raise the tipped wage, it's going to hurt the economy and it's going to hurt the restaurant business. Well, that's just not so. Just not so. Look at the poverty rates. And these are just, if you look at this is restaurant servers right here. If you take a state that has a 213 minimum wage, which is the federal minimum wage for tipped workers, the poverty rate among restaurant workers is 19.4%. Some states have already said that they're going to have their tipped wages the same as the minimum wage. They've done that. Where you have a full state minimum wage for tipped workers the same as everybody else, the poverty rate just among restaurant workers falls to 13.6%. If you look at all tipped workers, and a lot of people think tipped workers, you're only talking about people that wait on tables. That's not so. 40% of all tipped workers are not restaurant workers. Right now, we're talking about pizza delivery people, parking lot attendants, people working hair salons, your manicurists. That's about 40% of tipped workers. About 40% of tipped workers.
Your time has expired, Senator.
I ask consent for another 5 minutes.
Is there an objection? Without objection.
I thank the senator for letting me go on for a few more minutes. And so the point being that if you looked at all tipped workers in states with a 213 minimum wage, poverty rate 16.1%, where a state has a minimum wage the same for tipped workers or non-tipped, the poverty rate is 12.1%. So again, we also hear that job growth will be lost if we increase the minimum wage. Well, again, we've done some data digging here. If you look here at restaurant tipped worker job growth, just from 2009 to 2012, in states that have a 213 minimum wage, tipped wage, same as the federal, the job growth among restaurant workers has been 2%. In a state which has a minimum wage for tipped workers the same as everybody else, the job growth has been twice as much, 4%. This is among restaurant workers, just among restaurant workers. Look over here, the sales per capita. Now, these are just restaurant workers. This is sales per capita in the state. In those states with a 213 minimum wage, $1.42 per capita. In states with a full minimum wage, $1.68 per capita. That's why economists are saying raising the minimum wage and raising the tipped wage, minimum wage, is good for the economy. It increases aggregate demand. You might say, why would this job growth be more? Why would the sales be more in a state with a higher minimum wage for restaurant workers? Easy. If the restaurant workers are making enough money to go out and eat themselves or to do other things, they increase the wages for all of the other restaurant workers in the state. And that's true. How many times have I heard from people who wait on tables or restaurant workers who say, I wish I could make some more money. I'd like to go out and eat myself sometime. But they don't make enough money to do that. But in the states, and where they have a full state minimum wage, both the job growth and the sales per capita are much, much greater. Lastly, and here it's just, this is what's unconscionable. This is unconscionable. This is a restaurant worker in the District of Columbia, and she got a paycheck. And her paycheck is for $0 and 0 cents. Have you ever seen a paycheck for $0? Why is that? Because she's a tipped worker making $213, and after they took out her FICA taxes and sales and other taxes and things like that, she got $0. And so therefore, she had to rely upon only her tips. But what are tips? Here's what a lot of people don't understand. How do you classify a tipped worker? How do you classify a tipped worker? If you make more than $30 a month in tips, you can be classified as a tipped worker. Think about that. If you make more than $30 a month. So if you work 5 days a week for a month, 20, that's $1.50 a day. If you make more than $1.50 a day in tips, you can be classified as a tipped worker and be paid $2.13 an hour. You look at that and you say, that can't be right. But it is right. That is exactly what's happening. Tipped workers are getting, they're getting at the bottom of the barrel. And yet we rely upon them for so many things. People pushing wheelchairs in the airport, valet attendants, parking attendants, everybody. There's a lot of people that classify as a tipped worker if they make more than $30 a month in tips. $1.50 a day. Think about that. $1.50 a day. They get that. They get classified as a tipped worker. They can be paid $2.13 an hour. So again, Mr. President, the time has come. The people of America understand this. Working families understand it. This is a civil rights bill. It's a women's issue bill. And I say it's a civil rights bill because if you look at the people who are going to get benefits, 13 million people, 28% of African American workers, 32% of Hispanic workers, 19% of Asians and other workers will get a raise. This is a civil rights bill. It's a women's issue bill because 55% of the people making minimum wages in America are women. It's a children's issue. Kids who aren't getting adequate health care and nutrition and child care are the kids of people making the minimum wage or tipped wages, even less. So it's a civil rights bill, it's a women's issue, it's a kids issue, and it's an economic issue for America. It's time to give America a raise and raise the minimum wage. I yield the floor.